I think it is going to be another golden age. And I think to your point, it's the companies that really understand that the way we had done things in the past is not the way forward. It's really about understanding holistically, thinking holistically. It's about systems thinking, systems design, and understanding that the planet is more, it's not just about humans, it's about the whole planet. And I think that's the opportunity.
Welcome to 1.5 Media and Innovators Magazine. This is Inside Ideas. I'm your host, Marc Buckley, and this is a multi-format video podcast that's also distributed throughout all the podcast channels, Apple, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify and many, many others. Basically, we set this up in a very specific way that it's a deep dive dialogue discussion between me and my guest. Today, my guest is the wonderful Jeremy Tai Abbett, and we're going to try to get into a dialogue that removes biases, that gets into the depth and substance of different topics that we're feeling at this moment in time during this pandemic, but also on emerging technologies, sustainability, environmentalism, global food reform, regenerative practices, and some really emerging and systems themes that we've had around for a long time that we really need to bring out, focus in on, and transition to in this great resetting, So we'll talk about some sense making. We'll talk about different tools that we can use, and that brings me to my guest today. Jeremy Tai Abbett is an American designer and maker of delightful interactions between peoples, machines, and culture. He was born in Vietnam and raised in Minnesota. He now lives in my hometown, or my city where I live, in Hamburg, Germany, in northern city of Hamburg. Jeremy's interest in design was piqued at an early age by his parents, who did landscape architecture and a psychologist, while his curiosity for world building was a result of many hours of playing and the original 80s classic role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons, which I played as well. An obsession with skateboarding. These highlights later included skating in a demo with Tony Hawk, laying down silky smooth grinds, and being in Thrasher Magazine. And in 1996, Jeremy founded a design agency called Fork Unstable Media. Obviously, from the sound of it, Fork, there was a lot of focus on food media and things, as well as many others. He was a creative partner, developing work for companies such as Nivea, Lufthansa, Daimler, and Wired Magazine, to name just a few. Jeremy also spent 4 years at Google as a creative evangelist and co-founded a multidisciplinary studio, Truth Dare, Double Dare, and was founding postgraduate at Interaction Design Institute, Evira, if I'm saying that right. Thank you so much for being here, Jeremy. I hope you can hear me, and I'm so excited to have you. We've been not friends a lifetime or a long time, but I think about 2014, maybe around that time, maybe 2013 was our paths kind of crossed. Is that right?
That sounds about right. I think we met at, was it Italy or Austria? I'm not quite sure. Somewhere in Europe, though.
Yeah, we definitely didn't meet here in Hamburg. That came much later, where we sat down and had a coffee at a nice Jewish cafe, Jewish coffee shop here in Hamburg, where we actually got the time to settle down and talk and engage with each other. Did I leave anything out in your biography that you would like the listeners to know about you?
That was pretty complete. I think, if if I heard it correctly, it sounds pretty complete. I mean, I am married. I have two children, but that's, you know, and a cat now. One of them passed away. We used to have two cats, but
Sorry to hear that.
that's about that. Yeah, it's been a little while, so yeah.
Well, Jeremy, we've as we've seen each other on the road at speaking engagements, at different events and workshops that we've done, it's very unique because our paths usually cross early in the mornings. You get up early and go out running, also to discover and do some drone work. You go out and do some drone flights, maybe combine that with your running. And I'm usually either coming back or going out for my early morning coffee, vitamin, exercise routine myself. And so we've usually pass on the stairs because we don't take the elevator. We're passing each other on the stairs. So I wanted you on the show because you're a very unique creative talent. And about not even a year ago, we saw each other, we passed each other when you were with your child. You were going to a Fridays for Future demonstration in Hamburg, and you were walking one way towards the one of the stages in the Fridays for Future demonstration, or day off of school for the kids with your child. And I was walking the other way to an environmental meeting, actually, same thing. And what drew you to take your child? What do you feel about this movement, Fridays for Future, and what is your stance and place in what's going on around the environmental climate movement?
It's an interesting question because I grew up, you know, I was born in the early 70s, and if I remember correctly, there was imagery and things around like this peace movement and stuff. I mean, we were getting beyond the hippie stage and stuff. So I think now, if we fast forward to now, this Fridays for Future, it's a different generation that is concerned about it. Whereas we've gone through so many decades of people not really caring. You know, I think people care, like yourself, but I think it's hard for people to really understand, what does that mean? If I care for something, how do I take action? And I think now with this movement of Fridays for Future, although it's not new, this idea of going out and demonstrating for what you believe in, I think it's really strung a chord with a new generation. And I think that is the big difference now, because before it was, people would say, yes, global warming is an issue. We've had Al Gore talk about it and really being an advocate for how can we really understand what that means. But for the most part, people didn't change their behaviors because life is comfortable. And as human beings, we like to live in comfort. But I think that you need a new voice, a new generation, a new perspective to really spark this creativity and this imagination and this sense of action. And I think that's what, for me, Fridays of Future is really about. So it wasn't a coincidence that I was there when I met you on the street with my child, because in the end, the next generation are the ones that are gonna have to live through what we're doing. And I think that is really about what Friday for Future is about. It's not about asking for permission to go out, it's striking. And that's what the whole premise is, right? We're gonna take Friday off, and we might not have permission from the authorities, the school authorities, but we want to do it because we believe in it. And that's what people do when they strike. They don't do it because they want to stay comfortable. They do it because they understand that what they have in front of them is going to be uncomfortable.
You strike me as someone in our past exchanges that has extreme discipline and ethics, and not only around work, but are you an activist? Are you a striker? Are you somebody who likes to kind of be in the controversial edge, or has the surroundings of our environment or world, the way things have developed in the last 10 years for us, kind of pushed you in that direction because of one reason or the other?
Yeah, I think it's really a question of how we choose to live our lives. And if I look at the both of us, you and myself, we're both expatriates, we're expats. We decide to live in a country that, for the most part, we didn't grow up in. You have some relatives here, perhaps. I had Actually, my grandpa, because I'm adopted, my grandpa was actually fought against the Germans in World War II. So that was some of a history. But like I was saying, it's really that we're here as expats that makes us unique. And what that means is, I think when it comes to understanding perspectives, what's interesting is not in the middle. So a lot of times people like to stay in the middle of things, but what's interesting are the edges. And I think as long as you stay on the edges, that's where the interesting things happen. And I think as an expat, just by choice, by us living in a different country, by choice, we decide to have a different perspective and live differently. So I wouldn't say I'm like an activist per se, but I definitely act upon what I think is important, whether it's Fridays for Future, global warming, the current issue that has come to rise, but it has always been an issue, which is Black Lives Matter,
Yes,
the
definitely.
social and economic justice. I think those are really important things. And I think the ability for us to go out on the street and really share our voice, that is the difference between someone that decides just to post something on Facebook, you know, or on a social network. And that's where you have to get people. You have to get them so excited that they get off their devices and become a little bit uncomfortable. Because as you know, you've been in a situation where you're maybe at a protest and you're obviously among with people that with like minds, but you're still a very small group of people in the whole scheme of things.
That's absolutely for sure. So you bring up a unique thing. So it's not just the environment and the climate, although I believe that's the big elephant in the room, but it's also the pandemic. It's also Black Lives Matter. And how has this time affected you? How has it affected your family, your work, your life? The reason I ask is because I know you're kind of a nomadic, you're very creative, you're have this entrepreneurship spirit, social entrepreneurship spirit, and creative mind, and like action. And so how has it affected you, and what is it doing? Give me a kind of a look into your life during this time.
Yeah, it's a great question, because it kind of goes back to your original question a few moments ago with this idea of an activist. I think, and it goes back to my answer of being on the edges. I think deciding to work for myself. So right now I work for myself. I consult for companies and things, but I used to work for companies like Google or other companies like that. And I just prefer to have my own, I guess, roof over my head and really have my own autonomy. And so I think this idea of, or the reality, it's not even an idea, this reality that we're in, we're work from home, it's something I've been able to adjust to. Obviously, it's a little different when you have kids at home and they don't go to school and they don't have a program. So you have to balance that. But it creates more empathy for people that just are single parents, for example, or just have to work by themselves. I think for single moms or single parents, it really does show how much more work it is, you know. And I think in that regard, COVID has been an empathy builder. It has created just a different perspective to how some people actually live their lives. Work from home is not the way it is now when we have to be at home and the kids are also from home. Work from home for me means that you can stay at home, but you can go into the office. Right now, everybody has to stay at home for the most part, and that makes it a little bit different. But as far as resetting my day-to-day, of course, I've had a lot of things get canceled, or a number of things, but I've been able to adjust. I think during this time, if you haven't been upskilling yourself, learning new skills, trying new things out, then it's really a lost cause. Because this is the best time to upskill and try different things out, because it really gives you the time to try things out. Whereas before, if you had worked for somebody, you'd always have to go into the office and do things. But now you can do both if you're so motivated to do them.
I truly believe, and tell me if I'm wrong, that, you know, we're kind of both these futurists. We're used to the future of new work, on how we work from home, remotely, everywhere, creative, be able to take the tools on the road or wherever we're at, and that this time we probably had the tools already that we could quickly adjust and continue what we were doing and be fine. It sounds like I'm glad that you readjusted. I just recently had a podcast with Tomas David Barrett, and we talked about this human zoos. He has a show called Human Beasts that he talks about behavioral psychology. But this human zoo is what we've kind of now, during this lockdown phase, these four walls, or these walls, these homes, apartments, places where we live, have now become truly a place that we see a lot more of. And we're a little bit more confined, but it's actually our human zoo. So now we've seen some things around issues with children. How do you educate your children while they're at home? Do you have multiple computers? Do they do online learning? Is that out the window and you have to educate them somehow or entertain them? Is that a good transition? Are you pulling out your hair? As well as, during this time you hear a lot more domestic violence rise, more yelling through the walls, people who just can't handle 24/7 with each other, even though they are your loved ones, because we're now in this human zoo that we've created for each other. And how is that the right environment for us to be 24/7 locked up or in for a majority part of the time? So the question is, in that respect, some things that I did during this pandemic that lead to that was a quest. It's a 30-day quest called Earth School. It was specifically for parents who have, and I'm a grandpa and have adult children that have kids at home, to teach them about activism, environmentalism, about the issues of our day, what's going on. And that was in conjunction with the UN and TED Education. 34 million views in the first couple of days. Unbelievable, just success. But that was a tool that we could say, hey, here's half on the computer time to educate your kids, and the other half is now outside of that. With that nomadic and futurist that you already have those tools, do you feel that there's a transition that you had to go to, or others that you consult, or friends who really needed that help, that maybe didn't know how to work in the future, never did video cameras before, or online Skyping and Zooming and things like that? How did that transition work for you, and how did you help others during that time?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think life is really about transition. And for me, it's really less about the tools, because if you don't have the tools, you can make the tools. I think if you're so inclined, or you have the connections to make those tools. So for me, it was really about, when this whole thing happened, it was really about understanding what is the mindset that enables you to try things out, this curiosity mindset, this bias towards action. And I think that is more important than the tools. Thank goodness the tools are there that we have, and the tools keep getting better. But if you don't have the correct mindset, this growth mindset, this idea of, okay, I don't have everything I need, so I need to learn, I need to grow my mind, versus a fixed mindset where people just think, hey, if I don't have it, I'm not going to do it. I can't change. I like to compare that to, I don't know if you're a Harry Potter fan, but in Harry Potter, there's two characters. There's Hermione Granger, and she has a very growth mindset. They call her, she's always learning and try things out. And then there's the contrast to her is Malfoy, and he's like the villain. He's the blonde-haired rich kid, so to speak, and he just thinks, I got everything taken care of because my parents have the money, and I don't need to learn anything. So I think if you have that kind of mindset in any kind of situation, then you're not going to go places. So you have to have this growth mindset. And I found during this whole situation at home, I was able to adapt to it because I was used to video conferencing and trying things out and learning things. And my wife is a professor. And as you can imagine, they had to also reschedule or redo how they teach.
Yeah.
And I think she was a little bit anxious at first, but it worked out great. We just talked because the semester just ended, and she said she had great feedback. The mix between online learning and then towards the tail end, they had some face-to-face classes that they held. That was great, and she had great feedback. So I think it's, and some people talk about age, you know, if younger people can adapt earlier or better versus older people, but that is ageism, you know, that's, so it's less about age, it's really about this mindset. And I find, if I look at some of the teachers and how they adapted, teachers that my kids had, some were able to adapt really well and they did very well at teaching online, and some just, you know, it just was like,
it was a big struggle. It was
a struggle. Yeah.
It was a big struggle. Yeah.
It was. So it is, like you said, I think it's a balance between this online discourse that we can have, which is great. It's really about scale, but the personal, physical being there, that is that can't be replaced anytime soon either.
Yeah, the physical space interactions, the hugs, the smiles, the exchange, even the energy and smiles in the same room. Seems like you guys weathered very, very well. I'm glad to hear that, but it's also unique. I'm surprised to hear that it was kind of a transition and it was an adjustment that you guys had to make. I know in our past conversations, you've applied some of the things and with your children before, some of the creative bots and tools and photography and AI and different things with your kids and your family. I'm sure they, you know, not only photography and many other things that you do, so that they have a great example to kind of know where the future is going and what's going on. So they were probably pretty well prepared. That struggle for you, or that transition, that kind of uncomfortable phase, why was that? What is there anything you can put your finger on why it was that way?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it was okay because I don't have that much of a routine. I mean, I have a routine, like a morning routine, I go jogging and stuff, but then it's pretty open. I think for people that have a routine, like my kids and even my wife through her being a professor, there's a routine, you know, you go to school, you learn from 8 till or 9 till 3, you come home and then whatever, but that was gone in the beginning. And so that kind of changed the whole game, you know, and I think it makes us stronger actually as humans and hopefully as the world. It even made, amazingly enough, you know, as everybody was having cabin fever stuck inside, the environment got better. And we see all these things. Oh, now, you know, you'd see photos from in India, now they can see far away in the Himalayas, and all the smog got rid of it. So it's almost like it was a zoo, and we got stuck in our cages, which are our homes, and the zookeepers was Mother Nature, you know, saying, you guys stay inside now. We're gonna try to heal ourselves a little bit out here, and we'll see how you guys do. And I think it's somewhat ironic, you know, we build these homes and things for ourselves, but in the end, nature wins out, you know. I mean, nobody could predict that. I mean, there was predictions with COVID that there was something gonna happen, but that's just a prediction. Nobody could really understand how people really react to it. And I think in Europe, and especially in Germany, we're very disciplined as a culture, and we've done well. Whereas in the US, you know, they have the freedom for all. Let's go out and maybe listen into some news and some leaders. And now if you look at the charts, they're just off the charts. They're one of the worst countries dealing with this whole pandemic. So I think, I mean, back to your question, I think there is a bit of a transition for everybody. And for me, it's just about understanding routine. And I think sometimes you need a routine, and it's important as a human to have somewhat of a routine. But creativity for me is also being outside of that routine. It's trying something else out. And I think the situation lent itself, you know, everybody's going to try something out because nothing is normal. And I don't think we're going to go, people say the new normal. This is definitely not the new normal. This is just the way things are until the next thing, you know. So I think there's this quote from Gibson, the author, "The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed." And you asked about the future, and I think it's really about that. Some of us choose to live in the future, you know, like artists and creative filmmakers and futurists. They actually understand, okay, what's happening now and how do we push that out into how we want to live and write a story about it. And some people just like to live in the past. So it's really a question of how do we deal with that? And how do we deal with change and transition and understanding what's happening in the world?
You also have a podcast called the Learning Economy, which is getting a nice start, and I was
Exactly.
fortunate enough to be one of the first people on there, and had a wonderful discussion with you. What made you decide to choose the learning economy? What's the thought process behind that? Is that because you feel that's where our future really needs to be, kind of a new learning economy?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the economy now, it's really based on consumption. It feels like, right? I mean, that we're in a huge recession now. In the U.S., they're giving out like 600 euros or $600 per family. Hopefully, I'm thinking they think that it'll stimulate the economy because people will go and buy things. But
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is, I don't think it's not sustainable. This consumption culture that we live in. So for me, a really strong economy is economy that can learn from its mistakes and do things differently. And I think that's for any company or any person. So it's not about what you know, it's about how you learn, how quickly you can learn and apply that learning. And I think that's something I like to instill in my children. You know, grades are important and it shows that you can work within a system if you get good grades. But what's more important than the grades is how you adapt to that system and are able to thrive and help other people. And I think that is the real learning. So for me, this idea of the learning economy for a podcast is, you know, I meet so many interesting people every year, like yourself. That's why I wanted to interview other people, and their stories, they untap this learning, this deep desire to understand and do things differently and apply them. And for me, it's really about it's an economical way of approaching things. Is how well can you learn and apply what you learn to thrive and help others thrive.
Thank you. It's going to transition a little bit more and more with some harder questions. So if you don't know, or if I'm put you on the spot, just pause and let me know. We've kind of had a nice lead up to the first question. It's the burning question, WTF, and most people think it's a swear word, but it's not. It's what's the future? So we've been talking about the future that's kind of happened to us, and we've been most people are waiting for the future to happen to them and not being active. As someone who's very active and creative, what is the future?
That's a really great question, a very difficult question, because the future has so many different facets to it. I think for me, the future is one that is equitable for everyone, and that means it's in direct confrontation to what we know now, because what we know now is definitely not equitable for everyone. And the other question is that even possible? You know, if I'm able to thrive, can someone else thrive? Can animals thrive? Can other ecosystems thrive? I don't know. I think that's the goal. I think ideally that's the goal. I definitely don't believe in a utopia, because if there's a utopia, that means someone or something is losing out, in my opinion. But I don't think it's a dystopia either. I don't see these scenarios where we have something like robots taking over humans or whatever it might be. But I think it's really about understanding. It's about a lot about self-reflection and understanding what do other, you know, if I do something, what is the result of that to other people and other societies and other things. So I think it's really about being able to thrive in a world where everyone and everything thrives, which sounds very utopian and idealistic. And I think as we move along, technology helps us change how we live our lives. It's not the only things. Humans have to want to do that themselves, but technology makes it easier for some things to happen. An example of this, a really bad example.
Sure.
I don't know. We grew up, I think, in the 70s, right? And we knew there was, I think previously or in that time, there was this really huge oil crisis. And at some time, people said we're going to have peak oil. And I think there was a peak oil. But then, for better or for worse, scientists and people came up with this idea of fracking, which is terrible for the planet.
Horrible.
But all of a sudden, oil is not an issue really, because you can just, you know, you can wring it out of the planet, which is terrible. but
Yeah.
it changes the whole situation. It changes the whole economics of the world when all of a sudden we're not reliant upon one natural resource. Or we are still about
Yeah.
oil, but not just one single country that provides that resource. So I think what's interesting is what other new technologies can we apply that makes it more equitable for everyone and everything.
There's so many new technologies out there that just far surpass anything of fossil fuels and long-term success of where we get and meet our energy needs. We just need to really make that transition. I truly am with you with the future as one that needs to be equitable, have a balance that is equitable for all, because it is a planet for everyone. That brings me to the World Economic Forum came out last month with the Great Reset, that it's not going back to business as usual, that we call it the Great Reset. And do you believe that there's currently a global model out there, a plan that gets us to the next 10 years, to the next 20 years, that, one leader, one plan out there for us?
That's a really difficult question because, to be honest, I'd go beyond my knowledge in this. And I think you're probably more knowledgeable about that. I think there are areas that have definitely interesting aspects, but they're all like, the only thing I could think of are like the very back in the day, the Native Americans, the way they lived on the land. They didn't farm the land. They just, they were nomads basically for the most part. I think that's an interesting aspect, but obviously that's not scalable or sustainable for everybody. I'm not quite sure if there is just one singular view. And I think that's one reason we have these collectives like the World Economic Forum or the UN or different things, because it's really about having a diverse viewpoints and diverse perspectives that makes it more open and compelling for an equitable future. Because if it is just one point of view, then it can become a little bit lopsided, can be a little bit scary. And I think you always have to be challenged on that view, whatever that view is. And I think great leaders understand that, and they understand they don't have all the answers. But a lot of leaders from the past think they know everything. And that's when it becomes a little bit scary.
Yes, totally. The big thing is with our discussion, if you ever want to ask me the same question back or put me on the spot, if I ask you a difficult question, please feel free. And I by no means know all the answers. You know that I'm a sustainable development goal advocate, which is basically the Paris Agreement, the Agenda 2030. That is the world's first ever global moonshot plan of action. 197 countries came together for the first time ever, unheard of, unprecedented, and agreed upon something. I mean, two countries alone can't decide where they're going to go to lunch or what they're going to do on human rights or gender equality or whatever it is, let alone 197 countries decide on a roadmap, a plan of action, 17 goals. The Sustainable Development Goals actually came before the Paris Agreement in September 24th, I believe it was, of 2015. And then later, the Paris Agreement was decided upon and then later ratified. But it's a roadmap and it's an action plan with dollar amounts behind it, with backcasting studies. And there's just not enough discussions out there around it. I don't think people have understood what they are, grasped what they are. I want to know if up until now you've applied it in your life and the companies you consult for into their business models, into their systems so that they can make that transition. But I also want to tell you that what's happened with this great pause, this pandemic, this reset, is those companies that did not invest in environmental, social governance, this ESG investments, divest from fossil fuels and kind of put the environment or the SDGs in the forefront in their business models, they're ones that really didn't weather very good through the storm. But those who did have all weathered the storm pretty good and actually seen a little bit of an uptick on how they, not only the first quarter, last quarter of 2019, the first quarter of 2020, and moved on. But we're seeing a lot of other hard facts and numbers, and that, that's always the board or the company. It's going to be more costly. Is it worth it to make that transition? What do you have to say to that? And what are your thoughts on that plan? Do you accept it? Are you pushing it forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, right? I think when you're a startup or a small company, you have there's less interest in what you're doing. And you're usually a single business owner, or just a few people that own it. But when you become a public company, and this is where things get tricky, when you become public and listed, then you have different interests. And people that want to buy into your company, they're only doing it for the most part because they want to make money through your company. There are companies that have been started because they really believe in doing something that benefits everybody. And we know, most of the players, it would be like Patagonia, and you probably know more. But I mean, there are companies out there that do that, and they're still thriving, like you said. But also interesting, just as a side note, is if we go back to the car, since we live in Germany, it's such a huge car manufacturing economy. Right now, the most valuable car company is not German. It's an American car company. It's Tesla, and people, I hear all the time how much they rail, they just say Tesla's quality is terrible and stuff. But I think for me, it's not only about the quality of a car, it's about the leadership and the vision. And nobody's saying Elon Musk is an amazing leader per se, but I think his vision is something that people believe in. And he is creating sustainable transportation for the most part, versus if you compare it to companies like VW or whatever it might be, it definitely feels a lot more equitable for the whole planet, I would say. Although, I mean, obviously, like, when they first started out, they created sports cars that cost 150,000 or something. So obviously that's not for everybody.
The Roadster,
The Roadster. So I think, yes, but it was just the business, it's the plan. So he's trying to bring it down. Tesla's trying to bring it down for everybody. And who knows if we need cars in the future? That's the other question. So a lot of times, I think it really is about understanding. It's about self-reflection, I think, and I do a lot of consulting for companies like, car manufacturers. And you go in there and you talk to leaders, and they want to do a lot of different changes. But in the end, you ask them, what are you going to change in yourself? And sometimes they're hard pressed to answer that because they don't want to change. They're very comfortable. Why should I change? But I understand something has to change. So I think, yes, it's important, but I think COVID and the whole situation now has made it more relevant, like you said.
It definitely has. And I mean, that goes back to the sustainable development goals, really, because a lot of people they weren't presented to us properly. A lot of people didn't understand that's really a plan and a roadmap to get us to a different type of future. And it's one that's just to break it down to the very simple things in relation to our work and to business. It's a better business model. It's a better operating system to have a much more resilient, desirable future. You and I are already are faculty on Future IO Institute and do a lot for futurism and thoughts around emerging technologies and creativity and the future of work and things. We really need to quit waiting for the future to happen and start to create it. And there is a roadmap, there is a plan, because a lot of people during this time of the pandemic, they're like, we've had this happen to us. We don't know what to do. We're going to go out and buy all the toilet paper we can and all the cleaning disinfectant stuff. And we kind of hit this panic mode because we don't have the resilience. We don't know what the plan is and what the way we should be living, so that we're going to weather it through this time okay, where we don't feel like we're in prison, like we're stuck and panicked. And so there is something that's very, with this great reset that the World Economic Forum said that we truly need this great reset. I just want to kind of express to you, and maybe you can portray this in those you consult with, and talk about the benefits of it. But in all reality, if during this COVID-19 time you have not implemented or set an expedient schedule aside to restructure your business models, your operations, and how your organization works, then you're just returning to normal or business as usual. And that is a really bad thing, because through the implementation of this distancing or reactionary personal protection equipment, this hygiene, disinfection, and distancing measures, you are only ushering in this question that I asked you: what's the future? A dystopian future. You're going to continue down a path and a model of reactionary measures, so that eventually, actually, your entire organization will be wearing spacesuits or gas masks or oxygen masks to do their job. And most businesses will watch their organizations crumble with these type of Band-Aid measures that cannot hold sustainably into the future. The real question is what we asked each other is, you must ask yourself, WTF, what is the future? If you push this model that we're currently on, or the one that you've been working on, out into the future, what does your organization, what does your life look like in the future? Will you be able to operate indefinitely? Will you not be able to operate? I mean, in Germany is a big thing about the Tönnies meat companies, and everywhere in the world that operations have halted or created massive problems or layoffs or unemployment. Will this model that you're currently on be able to be pushed out indefinitely, or is there a limit to growth in this existing model, operations, or your organization? It is truly each individual business owner and individual's responsibility to drive this great reset from the World Economic Forum, from the UN, from the entire system, to not go back to business as usual, and lead on this sustainable innovation and return us to the safe operating spaces of our planetary boundaries. Because we truly are, as I said at the beginning of this year when we did your podcast, we are in a decade of action, and now we're just emerging from this emergency, and we need to build these resilient, desirable futures, which we all desire to live in. I think that is really something so vital that we need to hear. And you speak to Zurich Insurance, Adidas, and many other fabulous companies that you consult with and do things with. And I'm sure that you with your ethics and discipline that you've mentioned before, this is kind of where the future is going. This is how the transition and message needs to be, because that's your personality, your style comes in. I really believe that if we get this message and help them understand that the Sustainable Development Goals are a global reset of all economic models. If you look at each individual thing, gender equality, quality education, zero hunger, no poverty, consumption and production, those are all such things, Jeremy, that that's a whole new model than we've ever operated on before. It's not just some kind of business as usual, it's a whole new plan. And I don't, a lot of people haven't grasped that. And that's kind of, well, my job's been in the past, and at the events we've been in, you hear me repeat it over and over again. And it's funny how some people come up to me and say, boy, this is the fourth time I've heard you say that, and I thought you've always been saying the same thing, but now this time I actually got it and I understand it. So I would like you to, maybe give your thoughts or feelings now that that you know how important and vital it is that we move in that direction, but also how can you kind of give that wisdom of what's the future to your clients, those who you consult and advise for?
Yeah, I mean, if historically speaking, we just are in different patterns, and there's a regular pattern of propagation of how things happen, and this has been studied by economics as well. So if you look at it, it's basically three steps. You have the installation period, and then you have a turning point, which is typically a recession, where we are now, and then afterwards there's this deployment period, or the golden age, or this maturity phase. So if you look at it like historically speaking, I can tell you exactly. Industrial age happened, right? Industrial age, it was first about the machines, factories, and the canal mania. You had a huge recession, and then afterward, it was a great British leap. The British really took off. This was like in the 1790s to early 1800s. And then the age of steam happened, 1829, it was railway mania. I mean, internet back then was like the railway. All of a sudden you had strangers coming into your backyard because they could get there because of the railways. There was a huge recession in 1848 through 1850. And then all of a sudden you had a huge boom, the Victorian boom, where the British took off again. Another example, the age of steel. This is where Germany really took off. So in 1875, you had there was a global boom funded by London, funded by all their prosperity in the past. There was a huge crash, 1890 to 1895. And then you had the Belle Epoque. And the age of steel was where Germany really took off, because that's where Germany is strong, is manufacturing and engineering.
Yeah.
And then the one we didn't live in that time, but our grandparents, it's the age of oil. You had the roaring 20s, 1908. There was this huge crash, huge recession, the Great Depression, which we all know this photo of the migrant mother, and the child in the Dust Bowls in the US.
Yes.
And then we had post-war golden age. What's interesting is this age in the 40s, this recession is similar to what we are doing now. But let me just move ahead. Age of information technology, that's where we are now. It started in 1971. There was a dot-com boom. There was a little recession. It took off again, another recession, and now we're in a big recession now, and we don't know what's going to happen. I think that's what makes it interesting. And if you look at what happened is basically the installation period, if you compare it, there was creative destruction, and then afterwards, creative construction. Installation period, exploration of new markets. In the deployment age, consolidation, expansion of markets, and back and forth. Supply push to demand pull, financial capital in the installation age to production capital. So first you have people financing these things, and then when it becomes deployed, then companies can actually make these things and they produce capital from themselves. And I think that makes it interesting. So right now, we have the same, like I said, in the Great Depression, we have very similar things happening. You have we call them the turning points, right? There's recession basically. So what's happening? One of the things is structural unemployment. People are losing their jobs, even if they're well educated and stuff. There's de-skilling, there's this idea of hopelessness, there's inequality that's rising. Another thing of the nature of turning point is xenophobia. So you have had a lot more leaders like Trump and Putin and whoever might be, people that are really about the xenophobes. You have economic migration, so people moving from one country to another to get a better opportunity. You have this recession or even a Great Depression that we can relate to. And then the last thing is this idea of social unrest. And this happened in the Great Depression as well. So social unrest, people are becoming, I would say, disillusioned by the system and they want something else. So one thing that's happening or has happened in the past, in our recent past, is the Yellow Jackets in France, right?
Yeah.
It really started with some lady. She saw gas prices are so high and she wanted to make a strike. And all of a sudden this thing got huge in Paris. And I don't know if it's still happening actually, but that was part of it. You have casino finance, this idea of things are being financed and it's a gamble basically. You have minuscule growth and you have this populist Masonic leaders like Trump, saying, hey, it's not us, it's them versus us. And this all leads to the depression that's happening now and a huge recession. And then we don't know what's going to happen afterwards, but I think it is going to be another golden age. And I think to your point, it's the companies that really understand that the way we had done things in the past is not the way forward. It's really about understanding holistically, thinking holistically. It's about systems thinking, systems design, and understanding that the planet is more, it's not just about humans, it's about the whole planet. And I think that's the opportunity.
Basically, this symbiotic Earth, this spaceship Earth, that we're all crew members. We're not passengers, we're crew members on spaceship Earth.
Yeah, and which reminds me, because when I was in college, I was a really, really big fan of Buckminster Fuller.
Yeah.
And I just want to share with you a book I have.
Please.
Let me pull this off the shelf real quick.
Sure, go ahead. Tons of books back there for sure. I'm a big fan of Bucky as well. So
Bucky Fuller, he was he was like he did a bunch of stuff, and I was a big fan of them. This is your private sky. Let me see if I can get that in there. Yeah,
it's
Bucky
wonderful.
Fuller, and he talks about Spaceship Earth, and back then he created homes that were 100% equitable. I mean, sustainable.
Yeah.
The geodisc dome, he invented that, and he had just a different way of understanding things. And if you're interested in this idea of Spaceship Earth and what has people have done in the past, he's up there with Da Vinci, in my opinion, as far as,
I'm a big fan of Bucky as well. So a lot of the people I follow, and I have all his books, and love the way he designed the future and spoke about the future and created some actual real solutions. There's a lot of those innovations and solutions, sustainable innovations coming out that we're seeing emerging today. I like everything in this transition that you discussed, and how you kind of, it's almost a big history is what you just mentioned in your last comments. It was kind of a synopsis, a big history. I believe in the New Deal, Franklin D. Roosevelt and the New Deal and how that went. There is the new Green Deal, Jeremy Rifkin. We've both been at DLD, and he's spoken at DLD, and then there's the Green New Deal with the EU. And so there's this big push because fossil fuels are stranded assets. We need a different future. That future is based on platform business models, which are systems thinking, infrastructural business models that are well thought out, complete, and round. If you look at the top 10 companies in our world, they're all running dynamic platform business model, and those are all involved with environmentalism, social governance, this ESG, corporate social responsibility is all in there. They have a food division, a partnership division, they have a digital transition division, and they're a complete platform infrastructural type of company and organization. So they get it. It's the ones that right now are having to find out the hard way that aren't getting it. And now we've got the proof of the returns, the ESG divestments and investments that have been made that have really been outperforming the conventional investments. The Morningstar research, 24 out of 26, ESG investments. And then the proof that you mentioned in the beginning, through this pause and this reset last year, Earth Overshoot Day, the day we went beyond our finite resources, was July 29th. With this pause and this reset, the time where we didn't move around as much, it moved to August 22nd. So I think that's 32 days that we gained. We actually were able to have an effect on it. Now, I think overall, it wasn't the biggest effect that we, in relation to what the world suffered and experienced. But there is proof that we can turn on a dime. We can change the way we are. I mean, in the past, you mentioned the yellow jackets, but I've heard stories and news articles about people wearing burqas and face coverings, but now it's okay to wear face coverings and masks. But let's push that question out. What's the future? WTF is the next step. So we're not going to just go for masks to live in the future. We're going to go into oxygen masks and respirators and then spacesuits. That's not the future I want to live in. I want to fix it and have a business plan, an operational plan, like the Sustainable Development Goals, that gets us to that resilient, desirable future. And so by just continuing on this business as usual, we're going to eventually be wearing spacesuits. But that's why we have this other model. And that's kind of why I push those ideas and thoughts. Europe and Germany, especially on this new Green Deal, Jeremy Rifkin is really making that transition. The things that we're going to see are just unbelievable. I know that it's going to happen in the moment. We might not see it and feel it, but it's really coming. Which brings me to the next question. And I believe you've already answered it with WTF. It's an important question that might be the same. But what does a world that works for everyone look like for you?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? And I think I actually knew it was coming because of the podcast that we did. So,
yeah.
And I had more than enough time to reflect upon it. But I think it's like I said earlier, it's something that's equitable for everyone. So my opinion does count, but I think what you mentioned was the companies that are successful and the initiatives that are successful are diverse in thought and perspective. And I think that's the future that I see. It's one that it has diversity. It doesn't have all the answers. It's really questions. It's about really great questions and finding the answer. And sometimes those answers are not that easy to find. So you go on a journey, so to speak, a journey to find that answer. And that question has to be formulated from more than just one person. We talked about that earlier. You know, is it a singular person or entity or organization that owns this thing? I don't think it is. I think you even mentioned that the ESGs were made up from a group of diverse people and different interests that made that. And that's why it's so successful, or it has been launched in the way that it has been launched, because it isn't just a singular view. So for me, a world that I want to live in is diverse. It's always questioning the status quo. There's a huge bias towards action, and it's really putting the value in people and understanding that people, together with the planet, together with animals, together with the systems that we live in, are going to make the future worth living.
What can we expect to see from the compound Jeremy in the future? What's your some things that we can be watching out for and looking for that's going to be coming from you in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, earlier I spoke about these transitions, these patterns of propagation. And right now we are in this turning point. And I think what's important to say is during this transition and during this turning point, into the deployment age, the deployment period, it's the worst time to go back to the old ways of doing things. So what I won't do is what I've done in the past. What that means is, concretely, is right now I'm working on an early stage startup. It's using people. It's a learning platform, and it's using obviously people, this one-to-one connection we have with one another, and machine learning to create personalized self-directed learning. That's one thing. And the other thing is I'm just going to be constantly trying things out, constantly learning. Hopefully still consulting with companies, but actually not just consulting, but building things and meeting new people and doing things. Obviously travel has been curtailed immensely, but I think that's also one reason why I'm trying to upscale my skills, my skill set. You know, I'm learning Flutter, which is a program. It's like a framework for programming, basically, in different platforms, Android or iOS. I'm also doing other things, not just on the computer. So I think that's what you can look forward to, is probably less travel, just by not by choice, but by the environment that we're set upon, but also about building and trying new things out and really putting those out in the world. I think that makes things interesting.
Thank you for sharing that. So I've always seen you as someone with this cosmic perspective or this overview effect. And maybe I associate that with you because of the simple fact that you do the drone, you know. So in Salzburg, we were at the Future IO Salon or Institute thing in Salzburg, and you did the drone that flew up, and you've done it at H Farm in several different places. But I've also felt that your view and your perspective as a creative evangelist, that you've always kind of had that overview effect of seeing the future, seeing the bigger picture, connecting things, not only in those flights, those moments of capture, but in the big picture. So I love to hear that, and I hope to see more of those things from you as well. With that in perspective, we used to travel a lot, obviously, before the pandemic, right before I was in Thailand, and then after I was in the United States, and I actually got stuck in the US, and then experienced an earthquake there and didn't think I was going to get back to home base. So there was all sorts of experiences. I can tell you, with a little bit of futurism and foresight, that the knowledge that I have of where we're going to be in the future, that absolutely not. I'm hopeful and optimistic that I know enough that we will get back to air travel. There are some things on this year and next year's radar for air travel that you would not believe of. Sustainable, resilient, desirable air travel. 2024, 5-passenger autonomous drone taxis from Ilium. And that's just one company. There's at least 124 companies just like that are doing electric vertical takeoff type of helicopters that are 100% electric. There's Boeing and Airbus and Hyundai and many others working on electrical air travel that's at a commercial scale, that have dates and deadlines like 2025. So, and that's just one sector of our logistics, transport, and travel that's going to change in the future and allow us to travel again and to make that transition to not only the Green New Deal or the new Green Deal, however you want to phrase it, but to that sustainable future that we want to be in, because we want to spread the message. We want to be outside and away from computers and interact with people and do those things. So I hope that you won't get caught up in this moment and say, oh, dang, I've got to get ready to wear that spacesuit, or I'm going to be working online programming my whole life. I think that we will be seeing each other, even though we're in the same city, we could actually see each other now, but that our future is going to be much, much different. With one departing words before I let you go, with that, what I've said, if you could individually go up to each person and give them one message or one sustainable takeaway of something that they need to hear that will change their life and lay them on a course for a different future, the one that we want to have or see, what would that message be? Do you have one?
My message would be twofold. I mean, the more immediate thing would be right now that during the transition into the deployment period, it's the worst time to fall back to old ways. I said that before. So don't go back to thinking we're going to do things the way they were, because they won't. You know, we're moving forward. And the other thing is, it's probably more hopeful, is there's basically two things in the world that are infinite. It's number one, the systems, our solar systems, they're infinite. The galaxy is infinite. And the other thing is human imagination. It's infinite. We do not know what we can come up with as humans. And I think that's what makes life so interesting. It's infinite. You know, right now we're here today and things are happening, but tomorrow someone else is going to be here and they'll think of something totally different. And I think that's what makes life so interesting, is it's really about understanding that it's not been all invented. Life is infinite, and the stories we make and decide to share are also infinite.
I agree. We're just tickling the surface. We're just getting started. So
Yes.
we got to create that future for those wonderful family of yours and for our future. Thank you so much, Jeremy. It's been a pleasure, and I'm glad that you've been on, and I hope that we can have many more discussions and maybe revisit this in a year again.
Most definitely. Thanks for the invitation, Mark. It's been a delight.